Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer whose arrest in 1991 sparked public outrage and created renewed interest in serial murder and other crimes. He was responsible for the heinous murders of 17 young men between 1988 and 1991, when he was arrested in Milwaukee on July 22, 1991. But what made him do all these crimes? Let's see that. But before we head to the mysterious story, do subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so that you won't miss out on any of our latest updates. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Dahmer was born to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dahmer appeared to be a happy child who enjoyed typical toddler activities. It wasn't until he was 6 years old, after undergoing hernia surgery, that his personality shifted from a jubilant social child to a loner who was uncommunicative and withdrawn. His facial expressions changed from sweet, childish smiles to a blank, emotionless stare, which he wore for the rest of his life. The Dahmers relocated to Bath, Ohio in 1966. After the move, Dahmer's insecurities grew, and his shyness kept him from making many friends. Dahmer was busy collecting roadkill, stripping the animal carcasses, and saving the bones while his peers were busy listening to the latest songs. Other free time was spent alone, deep within his fantasies. His non-confrontational approach with his parents was regarded as an asset, but it was his apathy towards the real world that made him appear obedient. Dahmer remained a loner throughout his time at Revere High School. He had decent grades, contributed to the school newspaper, and developed a dangerous drinking problem. When Jeffrey was almost 18, his parents divorced due to personal issues. He continued to live with his father, who traveled frequently and engaged with his new wife. Dahmer attended Ohio State University after high school, where he spent most of his time skipping classes and getting drunk. After 2 semesters, he dropped out and returned home. His father then gave him an ultimatum: find work or join the army. Dahmer enlisted in the army for 6 years in 1979, but his drinking continued and he was discharged after only 2 years in 1981 due to his drunken behavior. His father sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin after his drinking continued to cause problems. By 1985, he was frequenting gay bathhouses where he drugged and raped men while they were unconscious. Although he was arrested twice for indecent exposure in 1982 and 1986, he received only probation and was not charged with the rapes. Stephen Tuomi was his second victim, killed in September 1987. Dahmer picked him up from a bar and drove him to a hotel room, where he awoke the next morning to find Tuomi's beaten body. He later stated that he had no recollection of murdering Tuomi, implying that he committed the crime on a blacked-out impulse. Following Tuomi, the killings were sporadic, with 2 victims in 1988, 1 in 1989, and 4 in 1990. He kept luring unsuspecting men from bars or soliciting prostitutes, whom he then drugged, raped, and strangled. At this point, however, Dahmer began performing particularly disturbing acts with their corpses, including continuing to use the bodies for intercourse, photographing the dismemberment process, scientifically preserving his victims' skulls and genitals for display, and even retaining parts for consumption. During this time, Dahmer was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy at his job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. He received a 5-year probation sentence, 1 year in a work release camp, and was required to register as a sex offender. He was released from the work program 2 months early and moved into a Milwaukee apartment in May 1990. Despite regular visits from his probation officer, he was free to commit 4 murders that year and 8 more in 1991. By the summer of '91, Dahmer was killing about 1 person per week. He became obsessed with the idea of transforming his victims into zombies to serve as youthful and submissive sexual partners. He used a variety of methods, including drilling holes in their skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. Neighbors soon began to complain about strange noises and foul odors emanating from Dahmer's flat. On one occasion, an unattended lobotomized victim made it out onto the street and asked several bystanders for assistance. When Dahmer returned, he was able to persuade the cops that the irrational young man was simply his extremely intoxicated boyfriend. The officers failed to conduct a background check, which would have revealed Dahmer's sex offender status, allowing him to avoid death for a little longer. Dahmer enticed Tracy Edwards into his home on July 22, 1991, with a promise of cash in exchange for his company. Dahmer then forced Edwards into the bedroom with a butcher knife while inside. Edwards was able to break free and escape into the streets, where he flagged down a police car. When the cops arrived at Dahmer's apartment, Edwards pointed out the knife in the bedroom. When the officers entered the bedroom, they discovered pictures of dead bodies and dismembered limbs, which helped them to finally arrest Dahmer. Further investigation of the residence revealed a severed head in the refrigerator, 3 more severed heads scattered throughout the apartment, numerous photographs of the victims, and more human remains in his refrigerator. In his apartment, 7 skulls were discovered, as well as a human heart in the freezer. In his closet, an altar was also built with candles and human skulls. After being apprehended, Dahmer confessed and began telling authorities about the heinous details of his crimes. Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of murder, and his trial began on January 30th, 1992. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Dahmer pled insanity as his defense due to the nature of his extremely disturbing and uncontrollable impulses. After 2 weeks of deliberation, the court found him sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. He received 15 life sentences, for a total of 957 years in prison. In May of that year, he entered a guilty plea for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, and was sentenced to life in prison. Dahmer was sentenced to life in prison at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Dahmer expressed regret for his actions and expressed a desire to die. He also studied the Bible and declared himself a born-again Christian, prepared for his final judgment. But how was his life lately in prison? How did he die? Dahmer was murdered on November 28, 1994 by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver. Both men were imprisoned at Wisconsin's Columbia Correctional Facility. Wisconsin was the first to abolish the death penalty in 1853, so Dahmer did not face the death penalty despite his heinous crimes. Scarver arrived at the prison around the same time as Dahmer in 1992, serving a 25-year sentence for an armed robbery turned murder. The safety of the serial killer was a major concern for prison officials. According to the New York Times, at the time, Dahmer had spent his first year in prison in protective isolation. Authorities believed that killing one of the state's most notorious murderers would earn a convict an honored place in the prison world. Later, authorities determined that he could be safely integrated into the population of 622 inmates. An attempt on Dahmer's life was made in July 1992. An inmate attempted but failed to slash Dahmer's throat with a homemade plastic knife. No one was injured, and prison officials believed it was an isolated incident. Dahmer was noted for upsetting his fellow inmates. According to Scarver, the serial killer would taunt other inmates with prison food shaped like severed limbs, drizzling on packets of ketchup to resemble blood. He would put them in places where people would be, Scarver told the New York Post in 2015. He crossed the line with some people, prisoners, prison staff. Some people who are in prison are repentant, but he was not one of them. Scarver ignored Dahmer because of his behavior, but he always carried a news clipping detailing the cannibal's crimes in his pocket. Scarver snapped when he suspected Dahmer had prodded him in the back. He took a weightlifting bar from the weight room and confronted Dahmer about his crimes. Dahmer had requested in his will that his body be cremated as soon as possible after his death, but some medical researchers wanted his brain preserved so that it could be studied. Lionel Dahmer wanted to honor his son's wishes and cremate all of his son's remains. His mother believed that his mind should be used for research. The two parents went to court, and the judge ruled in Lionel's favor. Dahmer's body was released from custody after more than a year, and his remains were cremated. With that, the video's come to an end. So what do you guys think about Jeffrey Dahmer's life? Do let us know through the comment section below. Never forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you up with the next one.